How we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network as we welcome you to our Season 5 Around the NCAA recap show, where we're going to recap the NCAA season. We're going to give you a season in review for the entire country, take a look around the nation, some of the big stories, some of the big players, see how bowl week went for all the teams, and just give kind of an overall feel of what happened this year. We always like to do that. I love doing that because I like creating that sense of immersion with the college football landscape that we're in, and creating a sense of, who could be a big player for next year. We see who the big players this year are, the big teams, things of that nature. So we're going to dive right into it. Let's take a look at how things went around the country in bowl week. So, of course, with bowl week, we'll start out with the college football playoff. As we know, those were the games that everybody paid attention to. Of course, Pitt 48-17 over West Virginia. We remember that one fondly. It was a huge victory, one that we thought was going to lead us to a national title. Unfortunately, it didn't do that, but it was a great game nonetheless. 48-17 for the Panthers. Wonderful day overall. Kenny Pickett, one of his best days as a quarterback, 317 yards on 20 completions, 3 touchdowns. Jake Keys completed a touchdown pass as well. Great game for both of our runners. Keys was incredible receiving the football. It was just a great game all around. On the flip side of that coin, Alabama knocked off Houston 35-17. De'Aaron King 4 touchdown passes in that victory, which was a gigantic win, setting up what ended up being a fantastic national championship game between the Crimson Tide and the Panthers. And of course, finished out the season, Pitt losing 34-31 to Alabama on a missed field goal as time expired. Of course, the Panthers faced tons of adversity, losing Kenny Pickett to injury in that game, which, put us behind the 8 ball and really probably caused a lot of the play calling issues that we saw in the fourth quarter, just because of a lack of confidence in the defense to make a stop, a lack of confidence in Pickett, or excuse me, not in Pickett, but a lack of confidence in AC Reese to make a play potentially, even though he didn't play particularly badly. He was just a little bit trigger happy to run in the pocket. But either way, it was a culmination of errors, and unfortunately it led to our downfall. It was a great game nonetheless for the Panthers. We did everything we could and just came up a little bit short. Taking a look at the stats, though, you can see offensively we were fantastic. We passed for almost 400 yards. We ran for 129 yards. Bama only ran 50 plays. We ran 75. We kept the ball away from them. They just got the benefit of some good field position off a couple of turnovers. They scored off of both of those turnovers. They were perfect in the red zone, whereas we had to take a field goal in the red zone. I mean, little things like that added up to really take away the championship from us, unfortunately, on the strength of a really good performance. But the fumble that led to a Bama touchdown, the pick that ended up leading to a Bama field goal, I believe. Fact check me, obviously. It's been a few days since I played the game, but we played very well. We can't hang our heads because the offense was good. The defense only gave up 320 yards. I mean, not their best showing in terms of yards per play, but they played well. They did enough that we should have been able to win. Unfortunately, we just couldn't do that. If we look at the player stats, of course, we'll start with your Panthers. Kenny Pickett, what a day for him. 14 of 22 passing, 245 yards and a touchdown in a little over 2 quarters. It was the first drive in the third quarter that our first offensive drive in the third quarter, he ended up getting injured on. So just imagine the numbers he could have put up if he was in there the whole game. I think you could pretty much push AC Reese's stats in with Kenny's and maybe even take away the interception. So it would have been a huge day for Pickett. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. AC Reese tried to do his best Kenny Pickett impersonation. 8 of 13 completion per attempt, not bad. He did have the one big 59-yard touchdown, which obviously helped his numbers when he found Paul Lease on that slant route that he took to the house. But Reese was okay, 60% completion, decent yardage. He had the one interception we'd like to have back. That was just a bad decision on his part to throw that. But not a bad game overall for AC. So, gives us a little bit of confidence going into next year that he can do the job, but it'll definitely be a bit of an open quarterback competition with a couple of new guys coming in here in the offseason. We'll see more when we get to recruiting. Rushing, CJ London, another big day, 97 yards, didn't hit 100, but solid day, 4.4 yards a carry. He was just 3-4 yards in a cloud of dust type of day for him. No big runs, but he did well for us. Had a touchdown. Of course, Jake Keys also had a touchdown, and maybe we should have leaned on London on those final couple of play calls when we wanted to center the football for the field goal. That's something that's going to haunt us for a little bit of time until we can get back to the national championship picture, just because, you know, the play calling there very suspect. But Jake Keys did still have a rushing touchdown. AC Reese, 4 carries for 14 yards. I actually expected more out of him running the football. They actually covered our read option pretty well when AC Reese was trying to run. So interesting to see there. Todd Sibley, tough day for him. 2 carries for -5 yards. I think he had -1 on his first carry, or -2, and then his second carry lost 3 yards. He fumbled. Alabama recovered. They end up scoring a touchdown on the ensuing possession. So tough day for him. He didn't see much of the field after that. It's going to be interesting to see what the future holds for our rushing game. Remember, we have a 4-star running back coming in, Davion Reynolds, that's very good. And so it'll be interesting to see if he takes playing time away from any of these guys. CJ London, I think, has earned playing time going into next season. He finished, I think, 7 of the last 8 games. He had 95 or more yards. So he was very good towards the end of the season. I think he probably has the inside track for the starting gig. Sibley's a power back. We could use him in the goal line and things like that, but he may not see much usage beyond that. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. We had a bunch of guys get opportunities with the football. 3 different runners, running backs, carried the football in the national championship game. Colin Wells, he's been a good third choice back. He'll probably push back to 4th next season. He might even get a red shirt, to be honest, because he hasn't used his red shirt, and we'll have 6 or 7 running backs for next season. So we'll see how that plays out. Receiving, of course, Jay Keys, as always, was the guy. 6 catches, 100 yards. Did not have a receiving touchdown, but he did rush for a touchdown in this game. Paul Lease, big day for him. 4 catches for 113 yards. Of course, the 60-yard touchdown from Reese. And CJ London had a touchdown pass as well. 1 reception for 34 yards. Took a screen to the house. It was an incredible play. Benjamin Ogden, only 3 catches, but I thought he was very good. Had a couple of really nice highlight reel catches. KJ Welch did well. Antonio Greer, I thought, played very well. So we didn't find a ton of receivers with receptions, but the ones that did made the most of them. Blocking wise, Cam Porter, what a way for him to end his career. I almost forgot he was a senior, to be honest, and he'll be leaving us after this season. 3 pancakes, didn't give up a sack. Great game for him. Ryan Henry, 2 pancakes, a sack against. Luke Davis, our backup center, had a pancake. Caleb Cannon had a pancake. Defensively, Jacob Lachlan led us with 6 tackles, but Jason Jordan was the real story. He was a force. I noticed him all over the place. 4 tackles for a loss and a sack from his outside linebacker position. He was very good. Darren Toth, of course, we know, had 3 sacks. Good solid performance from him getting after the quarterback. Avery Heller had a sack, but otherwise I thought he struggled. Couple of missed tackles, including on the touchdown run for Brian Hand when he went 37 yards. So tough day for Heller, to be perfectly honest. Sean Wolfgang ended his career with 1 more sack that tied him with Hugh Green for most all-time in Panther history. So he'll be in the Pitt record books there with his name right beside an all-time great for the Panthers. So that's fantastic to see. Of course, we didn't force any turnovers, so we got no ints or anything of that nature. A couple of deflections. Lachlan should have had a pick at one point in the game. Damian Vector had a deflection as well in this contest. Kicking-wise, Jay Bump, 1 for 2. He only missed 2 field goals all season, and one of them was here in the national title game. Very tough to see. I think the other one he might have missed, I don't think it was in the other loss, the Notre Dame loss, but I'd have to go back and fact check that. When we do the team review, which will be the next episode, we'll check that and see when his other missed field goal was. But, I mean, great player still regardless. What's amazing is he missed it from, I think it was 38 or 39 yards. He was 3 for 3 this season on 50-plus yarders. His 2 misses, one was, I think, from like 44, and that one was from 38 or so. So he didn't even miss the super long ones. But when you're iced, it always makes it very tough. So it is what it is. Eric Fox, punting. Kick return was okay. Artis Scott, Whaley on the punt return. Let's look at Bama quickly here. De'Aaron King, good performance. 190 yards passing, 65% completion, 66.6666 if you want to round up, because he was 2 for 3 essentially, with 2 touchdowns. So very good game. Showed why he was a Heisman finalist. 6 sacks against us, so we did get after him a bit, which is why he finished with negative rushing yards. Brian Hand, big story there. 1 carry, but he took it to the house, made the most of it, 37 yards. He should be their starting running back next season as long as he doesn't declare for the draft, because he's a redshirt junior. So he'll still be around next year to make Alabama very good. Josh Jacobs, 107 yards and a touchdown. He'll be in the NFL next year, no doubt about it. Receiving-wise, Yusuf Miller had a couple of touchdowns. John Phillips had a nice game as well, 4 for 52. We shut them down pretty much the rest of the way. Marcelo James, their tight end, had one long grab. But otherwise, they didn't do too much on us offensively. They just kind of grinded it out. We talked about how Lee Smith, their right guard, would have the toughest job all day. He gave up 3 sacks to Darren Toth. But otherwise, they were fine blocking. They kept the line moving. Ben Davis, unbelievable game for him. 6 tackles, 4 tackles for a loss, had a sack, a couple of passes defended as well. Joe Kelly, 3 passes defended. Jared Maiden had their 1 interception. Sanders, their outside linebacker, led them in tackles, also forced a fumble, which was recovered by Justin Newby. Very nice game for Alabama overall. Their defense did a good job. They gave up a ton of yards, but they hassled us, I will say. And their pass coverage was pretty good. Even though they gave up almost 400 yards, they made a lot of nice deflections, I'll have to say. We could have passed for even more on them, to be perfectly honest. Davis, I mean, that's the difference. When their field goal kicker goes 2 for 2, making them both in the fourth quarter. Our field goal kicker 1 for 2, missing his fourth quarter opportunity. That's the difference in the football game, unfortunately. So it was a great game overall. Really a ton of fun in spite of the loss, and I'm excited to see what we can do going into next year. Let's take a look around the country at the rest of the bowl games, any really good ones, but we'll skip through and let you look at each one. Arizona beat Utah State 38-34. Late touchdown there by Scruggs to win it. Ohio over Cincinnati. Texas State with a win over San Jose State. Good season for the Bobcats, 9-4. Western Kentucky over Temple. They go to 9-4. Temple, just a little precursor. I think I'm leaning to making Temple our 4th non-conference game next season, but we'll see how that goes. We'll see how the schedule's able to shake out. UAB escaped Arkansas State, knocked them back to 11-2 on the season. Big win for Kyle Trask, trying up his draft stock potentially. Fresno State beat USC Trojans after going, I think, 11-2 last year. Finished this year at 7-6, so a bit of a downturn for them. Good year for Fresno. Marshall loses to New Mexico, who finishes 9-5. Illinois 31-13 over Kent State. Army, great season for them. 11-2 they finish as they win the Military Bowl over Northern Illinois. Oregon 10-3 as they beat Kansas State 41-24. Virginia Tech over Southern Miss to finish their year 8-5. Notre Dame also finishes 8-5, beating Louisiana Lafayette, the Raging Cajuns. UCF 39-31 over Florida State, 20 points in the fourth quarter, including a late touchdown to push it out of sight because they were only up a point. Then they scored that late touchdown to make it an 8-point lead with just 30 seconds to play. So big win for the Bulls there. SMU wins over Minnesota to go to 9-4. Hawaii loses to Middle Tennessee State in the Armed Forces Bowl. The Hunger Bowl, or Fight Hunger Bowl, Arizona State knocked off Navy. They fall to 9-3. Texas A&M TCU 16-13. Look at this, just field goal fest here. This was one of the games because of the bowl editing. I had to just super sim it, and so it was crazy. Texas A&M took the lead with 50 seconds left, and then TCU drove down the field and missed the field goal as time expired to lose this game 16-13. So shades of the Pitt Bama game in that one. Michigan blows out Oklahoma State 59-31. I just want to see who was their player of the game. Did they have anybody with just an absurd game? Let's take a look here. Anderson passed for 2 touchdowns. I don't know if he's their star. I think he's their backup. So came in 88 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he ran for 132 yards and a touchdown. What a game for him. Unbelievable. The backup quarterback Anderson coming in. I assume he'll be their starter next year. So fantastic performance for Michigan's backup QB to finish them 7-6 and probably save Harbaugh's job. They beat Ohio State and Oklahoma State at the end of the year there to finish with a winning record. Auburn beat NC State in a battle of teams that really underachieved this year. Miami lost to Oregon State. Great year for Oregon State. Artavis Pierce, I'm sure, finished off his career with a nice performance. Yep, 2 more touchdowns. 75-yard touchdown run in the fourth quarter. Rice beat Tennessee. How about that? Louisville smoked Washington 38-13 in the Peach Bowl. Great performance there from the Cardinals. Washington just really struggled in this one. It was a great win for Louisville. Nebraska beat Western Michigan in the Heart of Dallas Bowl. Gator Bowl, LSU 41-31. Big game there for the Tigers. I'm not sure why that's not showing up, but take a look at that. 214 yards rushing. I think Grigsby probably had a huge game. He's a senior, so he'll be leaving. Calicolio with a nice performance. Grant Grigsby there. You can see 2 touchdowns. Florida 42-28 over Wisconsin. Big win there. Ohio State lost, so 9-4, the worst season we've ever seen Ohio State have in this dynasty. I don't think they've ever not won at least 10 games, and they fall to South Carolina 31-21. Of course, we beat West Virginia in the Rose Bowl. UCLA beat Penn State, who actually had a chance. The final play, they had an opportunity to try and tie it and had to go for a couple of Hail Marys late on. UCLA hung on to beat them 31-23. Heisman winner Dorian Thompson-Robinson with one more great game, 316 yards passing and a couple of touchdowns. Ran for a touchdown as well. Bama, of course, beating Houston in the Sugar Bowl. Clemson over Ole Miss in the Orange Bowl, 37-34. What a game there for the Tigers. They used a last-second field goal to win it from 47 yards out and 18 fourth-quarter points to certify the comeback. Great win there for the Tigers. Cal beat Texas in another barn burner in the Cotton Bowl, 45-42. We talked about how bad Cal's defense is at a couple of points this season. They showed it off here again. Viramontes with a bunch of touchdown passes. He threw for 5 touchdowns, but they gave up 42 points. Texas nearly pulled off a comeback, but they just weren't able to do it. Take a look at the yardage here. I mean, that's Cal every game. 500 yards of offense, but 400-plus yards of defense given out. Pretty crazy affair, but Cal ends up squeaking that one out 45-42 over Texas. What a game for Viramontes to end his career. Oklahoma 28-21 over Mizzou in the Compass Bowl. That was a great game because you saw the changing of the guard potentially. Redshirt junior quarterback Al Dingle struggled. They took him out after the first half, and Taylor Savage came in and had an incredible game in the second half. 241 yards passing, 3 touchdowns in the second half for Oklahoma, the true freshman. So the question is, will he be their starting quarterback next season? May we see Al Dingle potentially either playing second fiddle as a senior or transferring somewhere else? So that's a crazy turn of events as that one worked out. Miami of Ohio smoked Troy in the GoDaddy Bowl. And then, of course, national championship. Alabama, your national champions, over Pitt. So we'll take a look at the top 25 now. With that said, I don't really take that much stock into the rankings because the game doesn't know. Like, it knows we lost the national title game, you can see. But we were originally number 3, so it pushed us to number 4. I mean, realistically, if you lose a national title game on a final play, you're going to stay number 2. Bama's going to stay number 1. But I'm not that fussed about it. Clemson comes up to 2. Houston at 3. Pitt at 4. Cal jumps up to 5. Louisville to 6 with their win over Washington. West Virginia falls to 9. See, that's what I'm saying. They were number 3. They could actually have fallen that far, to be honest, though, because we smoked them in the Rose Bowl. Oregon's at 10. Let's take a look. Any other? Oregon State, great year for them. They're at 12. Army at 13. UCLA at 15 after a really good season. Ole Miss at 17. They fall from 9 after losing to Clemson. Oklahoma at 19. Penn State at 20. I thought they should have been higher, to be honest. Miami at 21. Great season for the Red Hawks. LSU back into the rankings at 22 to finish the season ranked. SMU 23. TCU 25. We can see Florida State, Navy, and Troy fell out of the rankings with their bowl losses. Now, we didn't cover this, so we'll look at the award winners. Of course, we know Dorian Thompson-Robinson won the Heisman. It's a little bit glitchy here because the game always gets screwed up and gives user defenses a lot of awards if you're playing long quarters, because you end up with a lot of tackles because they're not good. They can't figure out the assisted tackles thing in user games for no reason. So I won like all the defensive awards. We're just going to ignore that kind of and talk about the other guys who are big. Jawan Pass wins the Maxwell best player in the country. It's just another award for that. Same with the Walter Camp. That goes to Artavis Pierce, who finished second in the Heisman voting. You can see some good seasons around the country from a number of different players that were in those particular opportunities. And the Bednarik, here we go. So this is one of the best defensive players in the country awards. Avery Heller won because he had a bajillion tackles. But the game doesn't figure that out. So, like, that's why I have 4 guys at the top. We did have a lot of sacks. So, like, Darren Toth, 18 sacks. That's probably fair. Damian Dowdell, 9 picks, the corner for Nevada. Chris Smith, for South Carolina. So you can see a few other players that were in the running for these awards beyond our players, just so you can get a sense of who else was good. Nagurski went to Darren Toth. O'Brien, best quarterback, went to Brennan Wooten, interestingly, not Thompson Robinson. Zembiak from Penn State was 4th. Kenny was not in this award. It probably didn't help him that he had a bunch of interceptions. 15 on the season he finished with. Doak Walker, best running back, went to Artavis Pierce. And then you can see some of the other guys. David Coleman, the UConn guy who ran all over us in week 1. Great season for him. Bolitnikoff, of course, went to Jay Keys. Des Fitzpatrick of Louisville was 2nd. Zach Farrar of Penn State finished in 3rd. It's Jonathan Payton, true freshman. He was one of the user-created recruits I built to have some more high-rated freshmen available in the country. He finishes 6th in the Bolitnikoff, which is pretty incredible for him. Bama's John Phillips was 9th. Mackey for best tight end goes to Austin Cummins of Louisville. And we can see some of the other big guys around the country there. Outland Trophy, John Simpson of Clemson wins that one. Penn State guy, Shaler, Leon Sanders, Ohio State's senior center, 3rd in the voting. He's from Pittsburgh. Remington, best center, goes to Robbie Bell of Louisville. Interesting that Sanders doesn't win. Sean Wolfgang wins the Lombardi as best defensive lineman. Toth finishes 2nd. You can see some of the other guys that were in for that award. Barry Jenkins wins best linebacker. He had a great season. I don't think he should have won it. Jeff Greenwood, I think, was probably more deserving with over 100 tackles. But Barry Jenkins had a great year. 6 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, had a pick, bunch of tackles. Really good year for him, to be honest, in spite of him probably not deserving that award. Thorpe for best defensive back goes to Heller. Again, I don't think he necessarily deserved it. I think probably Dowdell with his 9 interceptions had a better opportunity for that, but it is what it is. Groza for best kicker goes to Jay Bump, so that's great to see. Very impressive for him. Best punter goes to Ryan Flynn of Clemson. Eric Fox finished 3rd in that one. Best returner, Darion Williams, another one of those impressive freshmen I created. Bama wins returner of the year with 2 return touchdowns on the season. So that's a look at the awards. Now let's take a look at the season stats. Best players around the country. You can see rushing, we weren't really near the top of the charts. Receiving, Jay Keys actually won that by a yard, I think. Tackle leaders, you can see where it gets all hoped up. Sacks, we crushed it this year. Kicking leaders, Jay Bump had one of the longest field goals in the country, I think, this year. 55, which would have been a Heinz Field record. Because we take Alex Kessman out of it, the real Pitt kicker who hit a 56-yarder. But if we go season stats, let's just take a look. We're not going to look at the Pitt stats right now. We're going to look at the best players around the country. We'll do the Pitt stats, of course, next episode when we do a team review. But best players around the country, best quarterback rating went to Bowman Sells of Houston. Mason Moran, Oregon State's quarterback, was 2nd. Thompson Robinson, De'Aaron King, Vera Montes. Kare Lyles of Wisconsin there. Zarek Cooper, Jawan Pass, Brennan Wooten. Glaceman of Rice had a great year. Most pass attempts this year, Kenny Pickett far and away. I mean, this is partially helped out by the fact that NCAA 14 does not sim passing a ton, in that even the top passing teams don't pass as much as the real top passing teams do in the country. You can see Justice Rogers, Mike Leach, Washington State, the air raid, 445 pass attempts in 12 games. It's still a lot, but it's not even close to what they do in real life. He's throwing 50 passes a game if this is real life. But we can see Jake Bentley, Kyle Banks, Pegrom from Western Michigan, Kyle Trask had a bunch of pass attempts, and you can see the quarterbacks that led the way there. Most completions, again, Kenny Pickett led the way, so great season for him as far as things went. Yardage leaders in the country, Bowman Sells was 1st, Thompson Robinson was 2nd, Pickett was 3rd, Cooper, Viramontes. We're going to see a lot of the same names here. Most TDs, De'Aaron King actually led the way from Alabama, 48 passing touchdowns on the year. Doesn't touch Joe Burrow from last season. I think he had 56, 57, something like that. Or maybe even more. I'd have to go back and fact check that. If somebody wants to leave that in the comments and do that research, they can. But still a great year for him. Of course, all those same guys we saw. Nick Starkel, big year for him. Most interceptions in the country, Stephen Duncan, the senior quarterback of Western Kentucky. Brian Workman of UTEP. Bo Davis of NIU, and then Kenny Pickett with 15, as well as Michael Robinson, Iowa State's quarterback, and Jared Starks of Akron. So, there's Ian Book as well from Notre Dame. Kyle Trask had 14. So Pickett, of course, high, but he had a great touchdown ratio to go against that. Yards per game, Bowman Sells. Longest pass this season went to Jet Duffy of Texas Tech. I actually talked about him as a potential Heisman guy at the beginning of this season. I thought he would have a good year. 25 TDs, 9 ints, nothing to shake a stick at, but not a great year. Most sacked quarterback in the country, Anthony Russo of Temple, interestingly enough. Kenny was high on the list. He had 38 sacks against this year, same as last year. Rushing stats, Davon Vigilant of New Mexico led the way. Savion Johnson of Fresno following that. I think that all these guys at the top, their teams run very option or run-heavy approaches. Steven Davis, I thought he was going to be in the Heisman running. Ian Welsh had a great year. Jeremy Butler of Ohio. Artavis Pierce, we know, finished second in the Heisman voting. 26 touchdowns for him, which is incredible. There's David Coleman. Harry Pearson of Tulane. Remember, we played them last year. Great season for him and the Green Wave. Unfortunately, he missed out on a bowl game because of the editing. They were one of the 6-6 teams that lost their bowl game to allow for the playoff, but it is what it is. Artavis Pierce leads the country in rushing touchdowns. Rico Dowdell, a great season for him as well. Longest run this year went to Clint Franklin, actually Florida's quarterback, incredibly enough, had the longest run, 98 yards. He's a really good player. I think Florida could be really good if he sticks around for his senior season. You see the longest runs there. Yards per game, of course, Jeremy Butler of Ohio. Most yards after contact, CJ London. How about that for the Panthers? So good season for him. Runs of more than 20 yards. CJ London, 5 20-plus yard runs. David Coleman with 5 for UConn as well. I'm surprised that number's so low, to be perfectly honest. You'd expect those to be longer. Most broken tackles was Cal's runner, Brandon Weiss. Sean McGrew's second. Woody Barrett, Auburn's quarterback. Most fumbles, Brett Avery had 6. Seth Green had 6. Kenny Pickett had 5. If we go to receiving stats now, Jay Keys, 102 receptions. What a season for him. Led the country there. Isaiah Johnson of Washington State was second. Zach Farrar from Penn State was third. He actually transferred. He went from Oklahoma to Penn State and ended up having a fantastic senior season. John Holt from New Mexico State, there. DeAndre Overton of Clemson we played against. Des Fitzpatrick we know. Marco Pitts from Wyoming. Courtney Lark from Houston. Isaiah Wright from Temple. And Keel Pollard from South Carolina finish out. I think that's your top 10. Most receiving yards, Keys was number 1. Courtney Lark was 2, though he had a much better average. And you can see some of the other big gainers. Julian Carter for Boise. They had a bad season, but he had a great year. Most average was Jordan Jones, so he was a real big play threat. Most receiving touchdowns on the year, Fitzpatrick and Jay Keys. Myron Galliard from SMU was behind them, as was Farrar and Ryan Owens of Wisconsin. Longest catch this year was Sam Mullins of Texas Tech. Justin Lane, 94 yards. And then Paul Lease, look at that, 93-yard catch, third longest in the country. Julian Carter was most in yards per game. There's Jonathan Payton, the true freshman. Incredible year for him. He's definitely a freshman All-American. Yards after catch was led by Diamond Lee of UCLA, the top receiver for Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Most drops, Jay Keys is going to be first by a long shot. He had 16. KJ Welch, though, with 9. As far as drops versus receptions, Jacob Sutton from Western Michigan, probably one of the worst there, as is Samuel Caldwell of Middle Tennessee State. Blocks, Johnny Randall of South Carolina, most pancakes on the season. Most sacks allowed, Bob Canary of Arkansas had a tough year in that regard. Defensive, Avery Heller led the way in tackles for the NCAA by 2 over Kevin Terry of Eastern Michigan. William Kwenku, Carter Coughlin of Minnesota, Chauncey Manak of Georgia, Jeff Greenwood of Notre Dame, we know from playing them this year. So there's your top tacklers in the country. Top solo tackles besides Pitt guys was Jerome Jenkins of Virginia, Andre Anthony of Arkansas State as well. Most tackles for a loss, Bernard Redd of FAU. How about that? Great season for him. I think he was also first in the country in sacks if you take out Pitt players. Some other guys there, Robert Davis of Oklahoma State, Carl Graham, Kwenku, Ryan Towns of Ohio. Sean Porter, we played against him for Maryland. Leader in sacks in the country, of course, Darren Toth, 18, Wolfgang, 16. Pitt finished with 63 team sacks. Then you got Houston Miller of Texas Tech, Bernard Redd of FAU, Eric Hardy, and some other big players in that regard. Most interceptions, Damian Dowdell, the senior for Nevada. Tylen Redding of Bowling Green. FIU's Jason Whitaker, so a lot of guys we didn't actually play against or wouldn't have seen in this regard. Chris Brown from Texas, there we go, a few major players with 7. Longest INT return was Deli Harding of Illinois, 98 yards. I hope he took that for a touchdown. Most deflections, Roderick Campbell of Northwestern, Daniel Isom, John Moore, Boston College, with some good seasons there. Most forced fumbles, Troy Dye of Oregon. And then take a look at that, Barry Jenkins, 4 forced fumbles for the Panthers. Great season for him. Most fumbles recovered, Eric Sutton of SMU, but Sean Wolfgang right there with 3 for the Panthers. Blocks, couple of them, few safeties this year. Touchdowns, couple of guys had 2, so we'll give them a bit of a shout out for their ability. We didn't have any. If we look at the kicking stats now, it'll take a sec for that to pull up, as it always does. But we can see, I bet you Jay Bump probably had the most field goals in the country this season. He did. 93% field goal accuracy as well, best besides Houston's kicker. So the best for anybody that had more than 15 attempts, tied with Antoine Lane of Georgia Tech. 55-yard long was 3rd longest in the country. Great season for him. He was perfect on extra points, as were many other kickers. I want to say he probably made the most 50. No, John Williams from Memphis had the most 50 yards made, but he was perfect. 4-4. J Bump 3 of 3. J Bump 98 kickoffs, 71 touchbacks. What a season for him in that regard. And that's huge in the field position game for us. Punting wise, we weren't even close to the leaders in punts. So we're not going to be close to yardage leaders. Total average, Dom Maggio was number 1. We'll see where Fox was. I think he was 42 point something. Yes, 42.5. So he's fairly high up there. 37-yard net, though, pretty close to the top in the country. Very good season for Eric in that regard. 15 inside the 20, which isn't high, but he only had 4 touchbacks. One of the best in the country in that regard. So he did a good job pinning the opponents back a number of times. Longest punt this year, Alex Hall of Marshall, and Vince Vaughn, interestingly enough, Vince Vaughn crashed into the party here with an 82-yard long punt. Kick returns, of course. Well, best average was Kaiser Artis Scott, and then Freddie Hawley of Hawaii. Darion Williams Jr. won Returner of the Year because he also did well in the punt return game. 9.8 yard average and a touchdown there as well. So that's a look around the country at the player stats. Let's do the team stats, and then we'll wrap things up here for this episode. So if we look at the team stats now around the country, total offense, of course, we were very high near the top. UCLA was far and away the best team in total offense this season. Cal, very good as well. The Pac-12 full offense. Bama, incredibly, was 3rd. Then Rice, TCU, South Carolina, Houston, Louisville, and Pitt. And then Wisconsin with a big offensive year wrapping things up as well. That includes, though, of course, total yardage. So that has kick returns and stuff like that. If we go by offense, we're in the same spot, but you see things shake up a little bit there. UCLA 1, then Bama 2. Clemson comes up in there because they didn't have a ton of return yards, but we were still very good in terms of offense. We did have an extra game. We were one of only 2 teams to play 15 games, so that helps us out a bit. You can see some of the teams that were trailing behind. Most pass yards in the country, we were 4th. Houston was 1. And you can see some of the very good teams were top of the list. Washington State, probably the one bad team in this list because they had no rushing attack whatsoever and no defense, I would wager, either. Their offense was good. Their defense, very, very bad. But there's your top passing teams in the country. Top rushing teams, we're going to be not towards the bottom because we had 2,000 rushing yards, but we're not high up the list by any stretch of the imagination. Points per game, we had 31. UCLA easily number 1. So even though we had really great offensive numbers, we didn't put the ball in the back of the end zone enough. You saw Jay Bump led the country in field goals. We probably need to start turning those into touchdowns more often than not. 35 passing touchdowns, fairly high on the list. Bama number 1. There's Pitt. 22 rushing touchdowns. Middle of the pack, I'd wager there. Army, of course, your number 1 rushing team, as was then New Mexico. Arizona, very good running the football. Oregon State, I didn't really touch on that, but Army was your number 1 rushing team. Auburn there. Florida, very, very impressive that they balanced their offense so well, as did South Carolina. Oregon State a little bit more run heavy, but a few teams have shown some very impressive balance as far as things shook out. Most sacks allowed, least was Air Force because they don't pass very much. Most was Temple. You see, we were high in the list with 40. We'd like to cut that number down for next year, no doubt about it. Most first downs was TCU. We're in the top 10, though. And so that's your offensive numbers. Defensively, total defense, Arkansas State, #1 defense in the country by a landslide. Florida, also very good. Oklahoma, very good. I have to wager we're probably pretty far down the list. We didn't have a bad defense, but we also had an extra game. So with 15 games, 4,800 yards against. If you take out the championship game, we're at about 4,500, maybe 4,400, and we're much, much higher up on this list as far as total yards, because there's teams like Arkansas State had 2 less games played than us. Same with Florida and things of that nature. So we had a very good defensive year. Most pass yards allowed were pretty high just because, again, the sim stats tend to lean towards more rushing yards. So Arizona State, very bad against the pass, though, as was Cal, interestingly enough. Cal had the 2nd worst defense in the country. Pretty incredible to see that the #5 team in the nation had the 2nd worst defense in the country. Least pass yards allowed was Navy, then Oklahoma. Interesting to see there. Least rushing yards allowed was us, then Arkansas State, Louisville, West Virginia in there. You can see they had a very good defensive year. Kansas State had the most rushing yards given up. Buffalo, a few other not very good teams you can see in this list. Makes sense. Total points allowed, Arkansas State was the best in that regard. I don't know where we were at. 300 on the nose after giving up 34 in the national title game. Most points allowed, Arizona State, then Kansas. Incredibly, Cal gave up the 3rd most points in the country and still finished 12-2. That tells you how good their offense was this year. And you can even see it in their team ranking. 99 offense, 82 defense. They certainly played like it. Country leaders in sacks, Pitt, 67 sacks. What a year for us. Temple was 2nd with 52. Western Kentucky, 42. Same thing. I think there's more sacks in the country in real life nowadays because there's more passing. This game just doesn't simulate passing as much. And so the sack numbers are always a little low compared to what they are in real life. But still, 67 is fantastic regardless. Most team fumbles recovered. Washington had 10. Missouri, SMU, Bama there as well. We had 5. So higher up on the numbers chart there, top 3rd of the country. Most interceptions, UAB led the way with 20. What a job for them enforcing interceptions. We were probably, again, middle of the pack, I think. If we sort by sacks, we can see what we had. 15 in, so actually we're pretty high up the list. We would be very high up the list in interceptions. They're top 20 of the country more than likely in those numbers. So good season for our defense, no doubt about it. And you can tell we were very balanced. 95 offense, 93 defense. Conversions, we had the most 3rd down conversions in the country. We also, I assume, had the most 3rd down attempts. 55% conversion on 3rd down, though. Very, very good on 3rd down. But we created a lot of 3rd downs because we didn't have a ton of big plays this year, to be perfectly honest. We didn't have a deep passing threat until late in the season. Our deep pass game finally broke out a bit. But we were very methodical through a lot of the year. We didn't have a big play rushing threat. We'll need to see if we can get some big plays and some explosiveness in the offense for next season. 4th down, we were 60%. The best 4th down team in the country was South Carolina with 7 conversions. The most aggressive team in the country was Oregon, 25 attempts, and they converted 60% of them. NC State, very bad. Washington State, very bad on 4th down. 2-point attempts. Let's go. I want to see where we are as well, since we may not show up. Yeah, we were 0 of 2 on both of our 2-point conversions. Virginia Tech and Memphis went for it the most. They both were bad. Eastern Michigan was probably the best with 4 conversion successes. And you can see the teams that just struggled with it. Finally, in the red zone, I think we got penalties and turnovers as well. Red zone, we were 70 attempts in the red zone, 48 touchdowns. So it's a fairly good ratio. We were 90% conversion percentage on scoring in the red zone, but we had 15 red zone field goals. So we definitely need to improve on that for next season. We did have 48 red zone touchdowns, though. We need to be somewhere along the likes of Bama. 3 out of every 4 times in the red zone, they're scoring a touchdown. We need to be more along those conversion rates if we want to win a national championship. On defense, we only gave up 38 red zone attempts, one of the best in the country. The worst was Maryland. Defensive touchdowns, only 23, so we were a little over 50%. 84% scoring percentage, so we were much higher than last year. I remember last year ours was very low. We were very good. 84% is high, but we gave up a good number of red zone field goals. 9 on 38 trips, only 23 touchdowns. So like the percentage of touchdowns we get, like Air Force, take a look at that. 28 touchdowns on 37 attempts is bad. 23 on 38 is not horrific, okay? So we can get better on keeping teams out of the end zone, but we weren't terrible. I'm not terribly unhappy with that. Penalties, of course, we're always going to be low as a user team. I'll try and get that bumped up maybe for next year just to create a little bit more of a toughness in our games, but it is what it is. Yardage, penalty numbers was Hawaii. Penalty yardage was Rice, I think. No, Arkansas State, incredibly enough. Two pretty good teams, just undisciplined. Turnover differential, Troy was the best in the country. Then your national champions, Alabama. We're probably middle of the pack, I think, although we did get a lot better towards the end of the season. Our 2 turnovers in the national championship game really hurt us and probably put us into the negative if we weren't there already. And we were -4 turnover differential, not good. 24 giveaways, tops in the country. 16 ints, which was not tops. It was high, but not tops. But we had 8 fumbles lost, which is near the top of the country as well. So definitely need to take better care of the football. We did have 20 takeaways, though, which was pretty respectable in terms of national rankings. But, you know, not terribly bad. So that's a look around the country for our end-of-season recap, of course. We're going to have a Pitt team recap episode. That'll be the next episode coming up as we finish our recap of Season 5, and then we'll get into the offseason. We'll see who we're losing, some movement of coaches. And actually, let's finish things up here real quick with a look at the coaches that are on the hot seat going into the offseason. So the coaches that will likely be losing their jobs going into next year. To wrap things up, because after we finish, like I said, the Pitt episode of the season recap, we'll then get into our off-season recap where we'll see coaching changes, we'll see players leaving to graduation or the NFL draft, transfer requests, and then we'll have to get into recruiting and bring in our our final targets for this season, because we're losing a good number of players at this point is what we'll see. So guys on the hot seat, you can see Lane Kiffin on the hot seat for Georgia Tech. Big name Schiano for Indiana. D'Antonio for Michigan State. Their security's low, so I'd expect them to keep their jobs. Some of these guys may retire, though, like that are older. Kirby Smart, tough season for Georgia this year. I think they finished 5-7, but they did finish out with, I think, 4 wins in 5 games or something like that. Maryland's coach on the hot seat. Mike Leach on the hot seat. Craig Bowl on the hot seat. Eastern Michigan's coach, Bielema for Tulsa on the hot seat. Matt Rule at ECU. Jeff Horton for Utah, as they were terrible this year, as was Kansas. So I'd expect to see these guys in the 30s losing their jobs, maybe even these guys in the 50s. And then who knows? Could see some new coaches at North Carolina, at Georgia Tech, places of that nature, depending on how things shake out. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hail to Pitt. We'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.